Good morning, good afternoon to those joining us today. Hello, my name is Danny Sack, and I am the Director of Product Marketing at SAP, and I am pleased to welcome you to our conversation about SAP Fieldglass Assignment Management and a little demo of this new product. Joining me today are Vish Baliga, who is the CTO of SAP Fieldglass, as well as Daniel Park, who is a Senior Solutions Advisor for SAP on the Fieldglass product portfolio. If you have questions along the way, type them into the Q&A window. We will either get to them along the way, or we will address them at the end, and I'll host a Q&A session at the end of the demo. So I will now turn it over to Vish Baliga.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to all of you on the webinar. Before we start, I wanted to kind of go through a little bit of background on what Fieldglass currently has and kind of set the stage for what is different with assignment management. Traditionally, Fieldglass up to date has been working in the area of managing contingent resources and services procurement. These two modules, if you will, and the process around them, starting with the gray circle you see at the right side, on the top, they're very structured. So you start with creating a requisition indicating what is it that you're trying to procure. There's usually some sort of collaboration and approval to refine the requisition. You then post the requisition, you receive candidates, you evaluate candidates, you negotiate, onboard, track timesheets, and so on. Similarly, if it was a project-based, has a similar flow where you would start with a requisition, you then send it out to your preferred vendors, then you evaluate the responses, and then you start engaging and managing that assignment or that particular statement of work. Now, what I wanted to call out here is workers are hired to perform a specific role. So when you create a contingent requisition, you are indicating what is it that you want this individual that you hire to do, what PO would they work against, and what would they do based on the controls in the PO in terms of what cost centers would they book their time to, expenses to, what is the rate that they would be paid, is all pre-built into that work order that gets created as part of that standard structure. In addition, as they consume time and expense, they book against a single timesheet against that particular work order or that statement of work. Usually it's a frequency of weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. Typically, a single supervisor may be the one who raised the requisition in the first place, is also the single approver of the work that that individual performs. And then once the timesheet is approved, we typically see that being created into a single invoice after it's approved. Now, that's the standard workflow that exists. When we get into project-based and maintenance work, we find that this is a lot more dynamic. And some of the key functions that are truly required in the controlled, what we could loosely say corporate spend, don't really fit well when you are in this project-based and maintenance work where there's a lot of dynamic nature to it. There's a lot of changes. There's a lot of things that cannot follow that rigid structure. So I'll go through a few of those. You cannot, each time you need to have a small task done by an individual, you can't go into creating a requisition. You can't take workers from one job and put them onto another job. Multiple time cards would be needed because the individual may perform different things during the day and certainly during the week. Each of them potentially working for a different supervisor. So the approval or the validation of the work now needs to route to different people. Putting that into a single timesheet for time approval would make it pretty onerous. So it makes it challenging to work with somebody who's worked on 8 different things during a week. You don't want to send it to 8 different approvers to get the timesheet approved and processed for payment. From the worker's perspective, again, a challenge if they have to enter time against multiple timesheets. And that finally leads us to a challenge from all sides. From the buy side, in terms of creating and managing these assignments, in terms of the individual filling out things, and even from the supplier side in terms of being able to invoice. These factors led Fieldglass to kind of go to a new module, which is what we're talking about today, and we call it the assignment management. And this is aimed at trying to simplify what I described as the challenges on the previous slide. Here, the focus is to say simplify the ability to have workers that are already in the system. So the sourcing part is kind of less relevant. You have an individual already in the system. They need to be asked to work on different tasks. The assignments can occur parallelly. They could be on several different tasks on the same day, assigning them easily, assigning them in bulk, making sure that they're compliant with their certifications is key. Another big change here is in the other two modules, it is usually the individual recording their own time using either a mobile app or using a web application that Fieldglass has for timesheets. We find that in the project maintenance kind of systems or requirements, the individual's time is coming in more from badging systems, gate pass systems, maybe even kiosks. And so the individual themselves may not be entering the timesheet, but we need to, as a system, capture their clock in, clock out, derive where they were working on, derive what they were working on, apply the right rules, and produce the right timesheet, route it to the appropriate individual so that it can be approved. So those are the things that assignment management sets out to do. Now, this makes us compatible with many different systems that we need to pull together to be able to bring this assignment management capability to our customers. I talked about the gate and badging system bringing in the time. We will still have a UI, so if someone needs to manually enter or come into the application and enter, they can do it. We will need the ability to correct, so we will have timekeepers or time recorders. They can come in and they can edit or manage mistakes that could occur. We are dealing with systems that need to send data from different places into the central services that we build. So we need ability to override, to manually correct things, maybe change some assignments that may have got tracked incorrectly. But this helps us through both the automated integration ability to bring things in, applying rules within our application that can be configured customer by customer as to how to deal with these records that come in terms of a clock in, clock out, how to derive the hours worked, how to apply the overtime, straight time, double time, holiday time, whatever the rules might be, how to work those processing logic, how to apply the rules, and produce at the end of it a time journal, which then the supplier can leverage to produce an invoice out of. So those are some of the key distinguishing features that this application creates for us. With that, I will hand over to Danny for the demo.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Park. Again, I'm a senior solution advisor, and I'll be the one to walk you through the demonstration today. So just to set some context, we're going to briefly touch upon these three personas, some individuals who are common in the industry. And just to introduce them all, our first user, Dylan Green, commonly known from the industry perspective as a timekeeper or supplier administrator. And then on the one next to that, we have Gracie Watt, who you can think of as an operations supervisor or manager, maintenance supervisor at the given plant or facility that Dylan here would ultimately work at. And then lastly, Calvin Webb. Calvin Webb will be kind of the glue that makes the program run, the ability to have holistic visibility and also change things from a approval or business flow perspective if needed. So let me just share my screen here, and we'll hop into Dylan Green and kind of walk through his day in life. So the first thing to call out from Dylan Green's perspective is that his task is primarily to identify time on behalf of the resources or contractor workforce. And then once he has that time, that billable time, it's to then dictate where that time goes. There are ways that the system can assist with that, but ultimately it's kind of that puzzle piece at the end where if someone's doing a lot of things, different roles, different tasks, different work orders, that he needs a space to allocate all that in one place and have the approvals built off of that single timesheet. So the first thing we want to do from Dylan's side is just to introduce the what we call time event. You can think of this as the raw gate information that may be coming in on behalf of the contracting workforce. You can see here that there's a slew of records here. You can just imagine the volume of this, people coming in daily, having multiple swipes a day, leading to thousands of these records. And one of the common tasks from Dylan's side is just to reconcile a little bit. Identify if there's any records outstanding so the application can identify, well, we have a set of badge swipes that we don't really know what to do with, right? There may be some error, the terminal was down or something of that nature. And Dylan can just, directly from the application, reconcile these issues by adding that subsequent swipe to close the pairing. If you think of the in-out, it leads to a chunk of time, and that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to focus down into one contractor. Her name is Maya for today. And we're going to kind of see how the application can deal with this real-time processing. So I've got a record here. We can see that it requires pairing. And from Dylan's perspective, he has the ability to, again, mimic, or in our context, we're going to be mimicking the real-time gate swipes, but we're going to add in that last piece to close this record out. And you'll see that the application will, in real time, identify that the subsequent swipe is now present, and it'll automatically update these records. You can see that it went from a requires pairing to now paired. On top of this, there's a series of rules that are happening. Not only did the application automatically identify that these two records should be paired together, and we actually also see that this clock out swipe that I just entered, the way that Maya works, she operates within the realms of a contract. She abides by certain contractual rules. Her last gate time swipe that was out, it actually automatically rounded. I keyed in 3:15, and the application has maybe a grace period built in for her to round that to 3:30. Right? So there's a lot of factors that are coming into play. Maya's schedule, the contract that she abides by, paired against all this gate information. And that's where the power of this module and the workflow really starts to shine, where this manual task that's often difficult to reconcile is now alleviated, and it allows Dylan's job to be easier and for him to be more efficient. From there, we also know that, from his perspective, he may also be just dealing with other things to address or call out, right? So requires badge pairing, pretty simplistic in nature. But he also has the ability to identify if people, there just are different errors, right? So again, Dylan's job to identify people, identify the time on behalf of the workforce, and to reconcile and troubleshoot if needed, right? Again, that first big goal is to identify working time. So from there, right, we're going to one step further, right? Say that the time has been identified, time for an individual is calculated, the application is running its rule logic. And so I've got a record here for Maya again, a little bit in the future. But we can see that now we're in a screen where the total time has been calculated. The application has identified that for this given day, Maya has 8 hours and 45 minutes worth of billable time. Now, again, if you think of where does that come from, it comes from those badge swipes that we just walked through, right? The series of information based off of how long Maya was working and the application dictating that billable time. Now, right away, there are a few additional things happening. Not only is the rounding function happening, the application is also dictating what type of rate categories that time should go. So on the bottom half here, we can see that based off of this 8 hours and 45 minutes, 8 hours have automatically been allocated to standard time, and 45 minutes have been allocated to overtime. Additional rules that are available here are per diem allotments, automatic deduction of lunch hour breaks. And again, right, if you think of this industry, this is just the way that they operate. The contractors operate like this within the realms of the contract and the vendor that they represent. So these are very common tasks, and all these rules are built behind the scenes and applied to Maya all the way down to the individual level, so that as each contractor has time coming in through the gate information, they're being processed based upon the rules and contract agreements that they abide by. From here, we've populated a little bit of this information, but if we were to start breaking this down, we can see that this playing field of where this 8 hours and 45 minutes should go, there's a lot of variables. And in a lot of ways, the workforce that we're addressing, their timesheets are volatile in nature. And what I mean by that is volatile in the sense that there are different factors that lead to different rates, right? Not only is it the contract that they may be referencing, but a skill set at hand, right? Sometimes these individuals are specialized and certified in a variety of skill sets, whether they may be a boilermaker, carpenter, a foreman, equipment operator. They all have different rates, and these are all components tied to the individual that they're qualified and certified to do. So we're going to walk a little bit through these columns left to right just to show you the power of doing this in the application, and that there's validity checks along the way paired against valid options in regards to Maya herself. So when we think of the purchase order structure, you can think of this as, what's the budget commitment and where should the work and the cost post against, right? This structure is flexible to address a lot of different purchase order scenarios we hear in the industry, whether they may be blanket purchase orders, limit purchase orders, framework orders, or even purchase orders directly created off of plant maintenance work orders and MMSRV. So there's a variety of ways that what this purchase order data point could reflect. But just keep in mind, it's the budget commitment, and these columns that we're going to walk through, they're subject to business requirements. So again, kind of the baseline from what we see in the industry here. Next value here is, the ability to categorize the spend within that PO. A lot of times we hear that the PO may have a different costing structure built into it. Most commonly we hear the breakdown between labor, equipment, and materials, right? So the ability to start narrowing down what type of spend is actually being accounted for. Next, we also see varying cost objects, right? At the end of the day, from a financial structure, what should this time and dollar amount be posted against? Is it a cost center? Is it a work order? Is it a WBS structure? All those variations can be accommodated in here. Again, right, it's giving Dylan that space to dictate where this should go. And then lastly, data points that are tied directly to Maya. What is she qualified to? This job code is a reflection of her craft certifications. And in this case, it's being narrowed down. She's only allowed to perform work within these two skill sets. So that's all she should get paid for. And then lastly, a contract. Sometimes in the industry, what we see is that although vendors and buyers may have an agreement for a set of work, there are varying contracts depending on the type of activity. Often the case, whether it's general maintenance, investment recovery, or even the shutdown turnarounds, they all tend to use the same type of crafts and labor skills, but depending on what activity and kind of the season of work they're in, they may be pulling different rates even for that same skill set. So again, this is a space for Dylan to just, identify all these variable components on the timesheet. And we can see down below here that this playing space gives him the ability to break down if Maya was doing different things on that same day, right? We can see in that first upper half here, she was a boilermaker for 3 hours against this work order. Later in the day, she may have been a carpenter for 5 hours against a different work order, right? Things that, those familiar with the Fieldglass side, we can get close to, but now we've taken it a step further, right? We've, in a few ways, we've, disassociated that hard requirement, and now Dylan can freely allocate this information as needed so that when it comes down to payment, it's being done off of a single timesheet. From here, you have the ability to save it and ultimately submit it for verification. And what this will do is there's a few ways that this could happen. It could route directly to who Maya may report into, or as we kind of alluded to earlier on, the way that this approval happens, it's very flexible in nature. Different people oversee different things. So the ability to dictate, well, who should approve Maya's time, right? Is it maybe an admin user? Is it her supervisor? Is it a combination of both? And that's where this can flow down the appropriate approval process. So again, that's Dylan, right? The 2 steps from his perspective is to identify time and then allocate that time correctly. So if we take it a step further and we now think of things from Gracie's perspective, we see that, in a lot of ways, her job is just to verify that time and approve it. But upon verifying that time, right now what we're doing is we're taking that real-time gate information after it's ran through the logic, after it's been allocated and picking up the correct rates. Now we're translating that into different roll-ups of spend and hours. And so what I want to do and show you all today is that information we just allocated from Dylan's side, I want to show you in the most raw form and show you the value and the potential power that it can provide the customer base. Let's narrow down to Maya here again and just look at some of the details of how granular this information is being captured. We can see what you're looking at here is essentially a single line of one of those allocations that we just did from Dylan's side, right? Each of those lines has a different set of variables that, again, drive that different rate. So from Gracie's perspective, she can see all those granular details down to every single minute that a contractor has worked. And one of the examples I pulled up here, we can see that she may have worked 8 hours at this job code, which is identified at this rate, and it costs this much. But more importantly, within the industry, the information on the right tends to be, if not more important, right? Where did those 8 hours go? Where is that $407? Which purchase order is it posting against? And having all this granular information at Gracie's fingertips. Now from here, right, all these itemizations, you can just imagine the volume, right? There'd be hundreds of lines for every single contractor, for every single combination. From here, what we do is we start to roll this up. We start to roll this up in ways that are meaningful in regards to downstream processes when thinking about invoicing, right? When you're thinking about payments and how this information is leveraged, what we start to do is now we bucket those individual itemizations, and we start grouping them within parameters that make sense. Maybe think about roll up the information by person, by purchase order, by day. And that's what we have presented here. We can see what we call a services seat, which is a reflection of the work that Maya had done on a given day, and it's notating what total hours are accounted for, the total amount, and the cost allocations or the cost objects that it's posting against. And in true Fieldglass fashion, having this information is great, and it's also interconnected with all the other items previously in the workflow. We can see that those 2 individual itemizations are notated here, and that relationship is established. Now, from the industry, and depending on the back-end ERP processing and AP systems, this would initiate the invoice process, right? This is the approved time on behalf of the contractor, validated both from the gate information and from the supervisor that now can route to AP to continue on that invoicing process. And we'll pivot a little bit just to give you a highlight of some of the reporting that's available from Gracie's side, right? Having this information on behalf of the entire contractor workforce, knowing who's available, what skill sets she has, the spend across all of her sites, all of her plants, all those individual purchase orders, and being able to have that granular visibility. Maybe just to highlight something that's pretty common in the industry is health and safety. Right? The ability to have insight into individuals, and in some contexts, making sure that people aren't working too much. So to highlight one of our reports here, the ability to see her contractor workforce, and for the application to start rolling up all those itemizations into valuable information for Gracie. Is Jordan, is Maya, are they working too much, and are they working too long, too many hours on consecutive days, right? That's where the application can start to take that information and start to pivot it in ways that are meaningful to the program users. Now, last person to tap into is Kelvin. This is our administration administrator, the kind of the glue behind the scenes. And the first item we want to actually walk into is, well, what are the details behind Maya? When we think of, as we alluded to, that there are a lot of things that are driving the way that time is being processed on behalf of Maya, right? All that information has to be stored somewhere. So what I have here is Maya's profile, and this is the way, this is what's dictating what she's allowed to do and the time that the pay formulas that she abides by. On the right-hand side, we can see those two skill sets, those two crafts that we saw from the allocation side. You can tell that these are the only two she's allowed to do. From there, we can see who she reports to within the organization. In this case, she reports to Calvin. And then from there, we see the way that she works, right? What type of pay formulas apply to her? What's her schedule? What site does she work at? And then a few additional fields at the bottom. Is she considered a runner? Something in the industry where people may be doing work outside of the gate, but still should be paid, right? The ability to have that latitude and flexibility to manually have time on top of the automation and the real-time gate information. And then lastly, per diem, right? We alluded to the fact that some of the per diem allotments, rules can be defined and applied to people to allow them to trigger based off of certain thresholds. And then lastly, to call out here, the ability to track individuals in their onboarding and offboarding activities, something that you may be familiar with across the other worker modules in Fieldglass, right? We're bringing those into here because right away, what we know from the industry, this is a process that is very disjointed, right? You may have one system that does certifications. You may have one system that does background checks. You may have one system that does training, health and safety, right? And here's an opportunity to bring all that into one place. Right? On behalf of Maya, we can see that these are the items that she is responsible to complete. Well, not her directly. Maybe it's her supervisor. Maybe it's the vendor administrator, right? There are multiple people that play into ultimately the onboarding and offboarding steps related to Maya. But we can see here that we have the ability to track those certifications and the end dates that may be associated with them, right? Again, giving people like Gracie and Calvin the visibility into the workforce to make sure that these people are actually qualified and up to date with their certifications as they perform work. One last admin function I want to show you guys from Calvin's perspective is the ability to manage rates. Now, I know we don't always get too technical, but this is a big differentiator for us, right? The ability to translate contractual rates down to the craft level and the rate type level, something that is often cumbersome and difficult to enforce, but we do that here, right? When we think of those combinations that we determined during the allocation from Dylan, our timekeeper, right? Two of those selections was, well, what job code or what craft was in relation to the time that's in question, and also what contract is it referencing, right? Those are two big components that drive how much Maya should be paid for her time. So if we think of that Boilermaker information, right, we see that right here, all this information is stored and enforced throughout the business process. Right here, we can see that whether it's standard time, overtime, premium time, or even per diem, the rates are already defined. No need for anyone in the administration or the business process flow to dictate how much should she be paid. It's all being picked up and enforced through the configuration. Another beauty of this is the ability to build in effective dating. On top of having this contract and rate structure established, you can even future-proof yourself, right? Maybe year over year, there may be a 1% markup based off of the supplier agreement. You can future-proof yourself and build those into the application so that come year end, the minute that the new effective date is triggered, that those new rates are automatically picked up, right? Ability to preemptively get ahead of some change management headaches. Again, lastly, thinking of that reporting concept, given all this information, there's a myriad of things you can do, right? Making sure you have visibility into overall spend, visibility into the overall headcount. And again, it's just a way to have that granular information at everyone's fingertips, right? So again, if the takeaway from this, if you kind of want a two-step approach is, the big things are identifying time against all the pay rules, all of the varying combinations, and then dictating where that time goes, all in a single timesheet, and the daily perspective as well, as we mentioned earlier on. So with that, I think we'll wrap up with just a few summary points in regards to our three personas here. So again, from Dylan Green's perspective, right, the ability to have confidence in the time and the way that it's being processed, reducing his manual effort, and again, allowing him to be more productive, right? Increased accuracy of time, leading to increased cost of savings, right? Less reconciliation from an hourly payment perspective. Next, from Gracie, right? Having confidence that any dollar amount coming through the system is being validated against contracts. And again, from a AP and invoice perspective, the ability to automatically generate these the approved time into payments, right? Eliminating swivel chair processes. Something we hear from the industry is that this gate time information is often used as a cross-reference sheet. It's not really the source of payment, but you can see that from our flow here that we're kind of flipping that on its head. We're putting that paradigm shift in where, now we will, give you an opportunity to pay off of the true source of time rather than being at the mercy of a supplier invoice and dealing with reconciliation later on. And then lastly, from Calvin's perspective, right, the ability to manage the program with a self-service attitude, right? No need to lean on anyone else. The ability to own the program in a lot of ways and to reduce ownership fees, right? And having that self-service configuration to reduce the stress and burden on additional IT resources. And lastly, some value drivers to customers. We alluded to a few of these, but the ability to track health and safety training at the resource level, right? That's real-time cost avoidance, not only in the situations of, of a fatality, but even the fact that if someone has not completed a training, there could be penalties tied to that. From there, the efficiency gains from Calvin to have that 25% efficiency gain, reducing that manual effort when allocation and the time processing is happening. And again, from there, reducing the time it takes to generate the service entry sheet, right? The ability, the bundling of the information that ultimately dictates how much should be posted against this purchase order and how many hours should be going against this work order. And then lastly, two items that are prevalent throughout the Fieldglass applications: compliance savings across the board when managing the workforce and reducing the overall audit risks, right? Having all these steps along the way audited and visible for both the end suppliers and the end customers. So I think with that, we'll pivot to some Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Daniel, and thank you, Vish. We have a bunch of really good questions in the chat, and I'm just going to go through them kind of in order. We have, I think, about 10 questions, so try and keep your answers pretty succinct so we can get through all of them. The first one, creation of work schedule rules, is that considered to enable the correct distribution of allocated costs? Are those customized directly in the app?
Yes, they're all configurable, and you will be able to set those rules and how they get allocated right within the application.
Great. And then at what point does the invoice for hours worked sent via Ariba match up with the timesheets that are being referred to?
That may be a little bit of a change. The idea here is to capture the time in the system and then take those approved time, post them as service entry into the network, and allow the supplier to flip them into an invoice. So there's no separate invoice coming in. It is coming in against the validated hours.
Okay, talk a little bit more, Vish, about the service receipt and how that is the same or different from an invoice.
Yeah, so service entry is like you've received the services completed. They've not yet flipped into an invoice. So we have in Fieldglass, for those familiar, the auto invoice of a timesheet. But along those lines, we could also look at auto invoicing of that completed service entry. But the issue here is, unlike in Fieldglass, there is truly this time journal that comes in, we don't want to pre-specify that 7 days or 5 days of work gets flipped into an invoice. We want to put that control back into the supplier's hands. So we will have the ability for them to group either by worker, either by purchase order, maybe by plant as required across these multiple line items coming in, and then decide which of them they want to invoice together in one document.
Okay, great. There were several questions in the Q&A about the time bundling and how that is integrated with badging and how that is integrated with key card swipe machines, and also how that is integrated into some of the middleware solutions that are useful in that. Talk, if you can, a little bit about how all of that fits together.
Right. So the assignment management is built on what we would call an API-first mindset. So every screen that you just saw Danny walk through has an API behind it. So for example, the clock in, clock out, we have a predefined API that's pretty flexible. Each customer and each badging system and each plant may have differing data that can be sent in. So that can be configured to be highly flexible. The API can be called in real time. Some of the newer badge systems can call the swipe data immediately to the API, can push the data. Some others may have a delay and may do it in batches. Some others may be needing to export and then import into assignment management and time processing. All of those models are available. The SAP Cloud Integration Gateway, if the customer has one, can also be leveraged to kind of sit in between as a middleware to pull and load into assignment management. The concept of where you want to enter, whether it is you're sending in, clock out, or maybe the badge system has the ability to do the pairing and then send in what we would call time record already broken out. If you wish to use it in that manner, that can also be done. So it's highly flexible. Where you can enter and where it comes in and how it comes in is completely up to the customer to choose and figure out what's the best fit they want to leverage from available choices that we have.
So let me restate that just to make sure that you're answering the question that was in the chat. You're not required to have a badging system. You're not required to have a timekeeper. But if you do have that, we can customize and configure to match your set processes.
Correct. If you do not have a badging system and somebody wants to enter it in the UI, that is possible. If you're capturing it some other way and you want to upload that, again, that is possible. So we're not assuming that any of these things are mandatory. So we kept it highly flexible.
Great. And then
maybe one last comment to that.
Okay.
Right. You know, if you think of, again, that first step from Dylan's perspective, the goal was to identify time. Right. In what we walked through is from that volatile gate time. But if the time is addressed in another way, the application is flexible to still take that in as well.
Perfect. And then you mentioned the cloud integration. There was a specific question about integrations with SAP S/4HANA Asset Management. Is there an integration directly to that?
Yes, I think we want to go into that model, and as those who may be aware, the Ariba network, the Fieldglass supply side, the asset-intensive network, we are all triangulating into a common gateway to kind of have all of these things be available for us to consume. So if there is any asset that we need to track and the hours of that asset utilized, that can also be pulled in.
Great. One more question around the payment process. The question asks, can the contracted rates and POs referenced or validated sit in Ariba? If so, how does Fieldglass validate against the contracted rate?
We will have a copy of it. So if you have the workflow that we are desiring is any services related PO there will be a copy of it in Fieldglass as we move forward with our North Star approach for services procurement and services management. So we will have a copy of it. And as time progresses, we will become the holder of that data from S4 or wherever else the PO was issued. And we will, as the time comes in, validate. So in the interim, we may have a copy, but later on, it's going to be where this thing will get three-way matched before it is posted back.
Great. And then to build on what you said about later on, what's next for this this product? The question is assignment management suitable for or used in the advertising industry, where they have to hire a suite of creative talent, photographers, models, videographers, artists, etc.?
It's probably, I would need to understand the use case a little better, but if you're not building it to fit a particular industry, I don't know the nuances. There may be variants that we have to look into. But as I explained, we have built it in a layered manner, so you can choose to enter at clock in, clock out. You may choose to enter as hours worked as a time entry. You may choose to come in with days data populated. We are not constraining it in any way. So, but once I know the use case better, I wouldn't say it is not possible, but I don't want to say it's completely ready for that. And those are the things that we want to look into the future. We started with this framework, the baseline, but the idea here is to be able to understand more and more use cases and see where all we can leverage this.
Great. Hopefully that answers the question about other industries. As we expand those use cases, more industries will be covered with this more broadly useful solution. Do you have timing for service POs?
Timing, I'm not sure I follow the question, but maybe the question is to say service POs and where it is managed and how it is housed. Yes, we already can support it. We just need to change some of the additional processing, if you will, for validating the service PO. Right now, it's sort of sits between Fieldglass, Ariba, and S4, but the direction is to try to kind of be the driver of it. We have to change some of the integrations, but service PO is what we will move towards managing.
I think that there's a clarification in the question. I think this builds on the question about POs referenced or validated that are in Ariba. Is there an issue with having a copy that changes contract rates, or that the POs will be out of sync?
That's the reason why we want to kind of move towards a model where Fieldglass has the responsibility of owning that as a source thing. The requisition is raised here, sent into the PO engine to get the PO approved. If a change needs to occur, it needs to be initiated back in Fieldglass. That's the direction we are taking it, because we want to manage the services end to end.
Great. That is all of the questions. Oh, is there a plan for integrations to systems such as SuccessFactors to be able to select from contingent to this new module?
Absolutely. So one of the major workflows that we have been working on is called the hire to retire within the workflow of SuccessFactors, S4, and Fieldglass. As part of that, external workforce management is a key area. And as part of EWM, we have multiple touch points into SuccessFactors for things such as learning management, and potentially even look at leveraging other assets for scheduling. And we kind of use all of those things in the combined workflow. So there's a lot of connectivity to SuccessFactors as we go down this journey.
Excellent. That is all of the questions that are in the Q&A. That was a very robust set of questions. I'm glad to see that so many people are interested in learning more about this. I guess thank you to our speakers, and we look forward to engaging with those of you on this call in more detail in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.